Hello, hello. Can everyone hear me? Okay. Wow, that is really bright. Okay, hi. Welcome to Threat Hunting and You, from bodging to efficiency in 7-ish steps. I thought of another one while I was at the previous talk, but it was too late to change it. So I'm sure most people know what the term bodging is, but for my American brethren and other people who maybe don't know the term, I think it's a very British term. But bodging is repairing something so it works, albeit mostly temporarily. It's a short-term fix. Duct tape is usually involved. I think a great example is we were heading back to the States for the first time since COVID and everything, so it's been like 3 years. And of course, our kitchen sink decided to leak. And right the night before we were gonna fly, and I was like, we don't have time for this. I'm not calling up a plumber, it's too expensive. So my husband's like, F it, we'll do it live, right? We'll just bodge it. We'll just figure it out. We make a phone call to some people who used to be plumbers, say, how can we fix this so we can just have it hold on until we come back? And we figured out the solution. It wasn't leaking anymore, so we're like, all right. And have we fixed it yet? No, but it's a good bodge. Then that's always the sign. But the point is, if threat hunting it's definitely not a new thing. People have been threat hunting for many, many years now. I actually heard the term thrunting. Has anyone heard that? It's terrible. I hope it does not stick. But a lot of companies still haven't really embraced threat hunting. And I think a lot of people, they hear about it and they're like, this sounds interesting. Hey, can you do this in your spare time when you're not doing incident response, when you're not doing your threat intel or anything like that? And so I was like, well, how do you start a threat hunting program? Like if you're a smaller company, right? If you're like a Booz Allen or a Raytheon, right? You've got this all down. So you can go get another coffee if you want. So yeah, a little bit about me, I've kind of already talked about, but I guess the two things to take out of this is I've been doing this for a while, but I definitely don't consider myself an expert by any stretch of the imagination. The joy of this career is that you're always learning. There's always something new. There's always a fire, like Log4j. But I actually only started doing threat hunting officially in 2020. Came back from maternity leave, and I was like, hey, I don't really want to be on call anymore. I'd rather do this thing called threat hunting. And the bank said, yeah, that's fine. And then lockdown happened, and everything kind of went, hurly-burly. And then, NBCUniversal hired me in 2020 to do threat hunting full-time, so work for them now. So shout out to the Sky guys and people. So here's my obligatory CYA slide. Obviously, the views and opinions and data points here are the sole discretion of mine, not NBCUniversal, and I've accumulated this over my career as a forensicator / threat hunter. So there's lots of memes. I guess it's old school. I still love a good meme. So how to hunt when you are a small team. Just to remember, you're never alone. You actually probably came from one of these teams or working part-time still in one of these teams. So it's always good to have these teams like in your back pocket or always talking with them, because especially in the remote working world, not everyone is still going back into the office. So it's good to know these individuals. So you have your forensics, your incident response, and your SOC analysts. You get some great hunting ideas from previous incidents. Many times we'll have the forensics lead come to me and say, hey, we just had this thing. Can you pull out the IOCs and do some threat hunting to make sure we've got everything? You say, okay, and then you come up with detections based on that. But then, obviously, in the reverse, you hand off escalations to them as well, right? If you're doing threat hunting and you see an active badness in your network, you're not just going to sit on it and wait for the report. No, you're escalating immediately to them, and you want to make sure you're giving them all the data they need to hit the ground running. There's nothing worse than going through, especially with time zone differences, it's very frustrating when you're doing a bunch of work only to find out 5 hours later when they come online, oh, they've already done that, but they forgot to attach that. You're like, that is infuriating. So make sure that you know what they need to start doing their work immediately. The SOC is also the first to action on a detection that you helped to create. So they're obviously really good for feedback. They also sometimes need a bit more clarification as to what am I actually looking for here? This is also where internal documentation is very important. I talk about that in a different slide. But they're basically the boots to the ground. They're in the trenches, so to speak. And so they know what is actually going on in your network. So a great example of that is we had a SOC analyst come to the hunting team and said, hey, we've been having this, it's like, PUP adware kind of thing, but they're getting really annoyed with it because they had about 5 or 6 tickets in about a week, and they're like, can you do some analysis and research and maybe see if we can catch it further up the kill chain? So I said, okay, sure. So I took a look at the tickets, and I found out that they are using the run key, but they were changing the executable name, but there was something about it that it was common amongst all of them, and that was the location of where it was in this weird and their roaming profile. So I said, well, let's do a query for that. And not only did we find the ones that they knew about, we also found ones that our AV didn't detect for whatever reason. So we found some more badness. So we'll say, thanks for that, and now I'm going to hand off another escalation to you to action. So that was a great cybersecurity life cycle in action. And then you have your intel team, and then again, I guess it depends on the size of your organization. Some organizations do not have threat intelligence, but if you do, you definitely want to get to know them, because you can go to them and say, who are the threat actors that we are actually worried about attacking us in our vertical, and what are the tools and tactics and procedures that they use. And then you can go and compare that to what you have detections for and say, well, I should definitely start hunting in XYZ, because we don't have detections for that, because we're blind. And then you have your detection engineering team. And I'm just gonna see if this, okay. Then you have your detection and engineering team. These are the people that are creating the rules based on the queries that you submit to them. So whatever your SIM is, or however you guys do that in your environment. So obviously you want to make sure, one, you're giving them all the information they need, so you're getting context about the query, like what is it from, what hunt did you do, so you can give them all that information, and they can go and make your query probably better, because let's face it, they are usually much better at writing queries than you are. But you get that feedback from them, and then it's just that good dialogue, because you just want to be able to get this done as quickly as possible. And then other teams that are great to know are your security architecture and engineering team, like your red team, I guess, and they can do onboarding for you, onboarding of new technologies. And they're great to know, because then you know what's coming down the pipeline of other things you might have to be worrying about hunting, because there's this new application that's coming online next week, and it just opens up this whole level of stuff. Then you have your logging team. And obviously they're important, because that's hopefully where your SIM is. And I'm so glad I'm coming after the previous presentation, because I talk about logs as well, but I have a bit of a more negative thing about logging. And you can't have a presentation anymore without not talking about the cloud. It is there, and it is a mess. And normally you come in well before, the cloud's already up and running, and you come in and they're like, what logs? And what do you mean? I don't know, we've just been spinning this up and we've been fine this entire time. And you go, okay, so it's always good to have a point of contact in your multiple cloud teams, probably. So this way then when you start looking at logs and analyzing, you can say, is this normal? Is this not normal? And then you can put that in your environment notes for further on down the line. So here is your generic threat hunting lifecycle, and I added in kind of where the other teams from the previous slides would fit in that perfect world generic threat hunting lifecycle. And I think it would probably be arrows going both ways, right? It is a two-way street. You're not just feeding into the response is also feeding into you. That's what you want in a perfect world. But step 3 would be to have processes and procedures documented. You might not always be what I like to call a threat sniper. You might actually have a little buddy at some point, and then you actually might get a full team. So it's important to, if something happens to you, for whatever reason you can't come into the office or something like that, someone can pick up where you left off, and they kind of know what the heck to do and follow along with what you've been working on. And I find that very tough sometimes when it's well, how do you do threat hunting? It's something that you just kind of pick up, and I think this is where experience comes into play, where again, to show my age, it's like the Matrix, right? When you first start looking at it, every once in a while you just see numbers, right, or whatever the heck they had, and then you get a little bit more experience, you start seeing blondes and brunettes, and then suddenly you're Neo, and you just I know this is bad, or I know what this is, I know this is good, I can set my focus to something else. So I think this is where you can't just have 5 steps. If you do these 5 things, you are done threat hunting. That's not really how it works. You have to know when you need to pivot and focus on something, or you can say, I'm going to focus on that later. That's not important right now, and move on to the thing that you were working on. And then now that you found something the heck do you do with it, right? If you're a small team, you could just, tap over to Charlie behind you and say, hey, Charlie, I got this thing, can you take a look at it? But unfortunately, it's not really like that anymore, especially in a global organization. So you have to know who the heck you're supposed to be escalating to. Obviously, when it's just an incident, you're escalating it to the SOC. That's pretty straightforward and simple. Bless you. But when it's the cloud, or it's the SIM engineering team or something like that, you might not know exactly who to talk to. And the cloud is a perfect example. You probably have multiple clouds with multiple accounts with multiple tenants. So talking to one person might not be the right person for this instance. So you need to have that written down somewhere, so that if it is hey, we need to find this person now, you're not just scrambling. And then having metrics, right? Management loves to see change in the right direction. So the things that we've kind of seen that have good things with management is how many escalations have you actually submitted to the SOC, or even to another group, like, hey, we found this gap in a security group in the Amazon cloud, we need you to go and take a look. That's technically an escalation. It's not an escalation as that is an incident, but it is an escalation, and it's improving your security posture of your company, so that is a good thing, right? And then how many detections have you submitted to the detections team to be turned into and actioned as an alert? Because obviously that means, okay, yeah, we might not have found something today, but we might, if someone tries to use that same technique tomorrow, we'll detect it and we'll block it, right? That's also, that brings up the true positive alerts, right? That is obviously the big win. It's like we could have gotten hit here, and who knows what could have happened. They could have deployed Conti ransomware. You don't know. You don't know what you don't know, said Donald Rumsfeld. But you stopped it there. So you can postulate whatever you want could have happened, but you stopped it, so you don't have to worry about it, and that is obviously a huge win. But yeah, so there's your generic life cycle with incident response, when you're executing your hunt, your detection team for your alerts, and then obviously various teams depending on what your report actually has inside it. So logs. Florian Roth tweeted this, and I asked him if I could use it, because I'm like, I feel like this sums up the life of everybody. Back in the day when I first started out, it was like there were 3 Windows event logs, and you didn't have to worry about, PowerShell was this nebulous thing that they said was coming, and we're like, yeah, sure, just like IPv6, it's coming. And then suddenly the logs just exploded, and then you have these huge corporations, like when I worked for the Department of Defense. How many computers does the Department of Defense has? Nobody knows. So you just think about all of those logs that are going, and you're like, you cannot be logging everything, right? So you have to be very picky about what logs you actually are ingesting into your SIM. It would be nice if we could ingest all of them, but I feel like you do get this tsunami effect happening where you have your OS logs and your SIM's like, okay, I can kind of handle this, it's okay. And then you get the service level log, and they're like, okay, this is a bit too much now. And then you get application level, and you get your cloud, and then you get your network logs, and suddenly your SIM's like, whoa, I can't, I'm dead. And then you're just like, I'm just gonna do a search for the last year, just like for everything. You just go, absolutely not, I'm just gonna poop on you right now. So just understand your log sources, and this is, again, where environment notes are very, very handy. Working with your SOC team is a great example here of documenting all of your log sources that you have, that you know about in your SIM, because obviously they are using the same SIM when they're doing their investigations. You're going to use the SIM when you're doing your threat hunting. So it benefits everybody to know what kind of logs you have in there for what applications and what those fields actually mean. And if you see something wrong with them, well, you go and talk to your logging team and say, hey, these aren't ingesting properly. Or you said these are supposed to be here, but they're not. So very important to be reasonable but hopeful, right? Like I said, you can't get every log. You can't hug every cat. But you can always have a wish list of logs that you just wish you had, and you start focusing on, this is why we need these logs, right? We would have had this detection for this incident, but we couldn't because we had a gap here. And then you can show value with adding that log source. And then hopefully with enough times or enough incidents, management would be like, hey, maybe we should ingest those log sources. And you're like, I told you. And then you move to the next one down the list, and you just keep adding and adding. But yeah, be careful what you wish for, because you might get a tsunami. The next one, I don't know if anybody's ever been to the Kirkcaldy Bridge testing works in southeast London on Southwark Road, right across the street from the Bluefin building. But they test bridges. They test the materials that, well, I don't think they do it there anymore, but they used to test the materials of bridges when they were building it to make sure it could handle the stress of things. And the things they have above their door is facts, not opinions. And I just think that is so important in the cybersecurity world and also in threat hunting. And it goes also along with trust but verify. Just realizing that you will not be 100%. There's nothing 100% in cybersecurity that is a fallacy. And so you will not be 100% correct or accurate. You can try and be as correct as you can, but you have to just realize that there's times you're going to be wrong. And realize that other people might know more than you, and that's perfectly fine. So facts, not opinions, but trust but verify. So I think, again, the previous presenter did a great job talking about the dangers of what I like to call Twitter sock, where there's just so much interesting things and people who claim to know everything because they have a PhD and they refuse to listen to somebody who doesn't have a PhD. And it's just, you just need to make sure you do your own research. And again, not just in this, but in life, to make sure that what they're saying is true and call them out on it. If you're like, well, wait a minute, what about this and what about that? Because people might say, so a perfect example is people think, oh yeah, we're collecting all of our AWS CloudTrail logs. I'm like, all of them? I'm like, oh yeah. And then you go and you take a look. You're like, well, I have these 50 accounts here, but then when I go and I check the SIM, I found 40. And they're like, yeah, so about those 10, right? So it's just trying to make sure that you're getting as much as accurate information as you possibly can. But the biggest thing I would say is to prioritize. I think maybe number one is actually more important because you need that network to help make your life a lot easier. But prioritization is also very important, and realizing that things will fall behind, hunts will be put on the back burner, and you will not 100% agree with what management thinks is a fire, but they're management and you kind of got to do what they say. But what is the most important thing today might not be important tomorrow because, like, for example, Log4j will come around and everyone's like, guess what? You are working on Log4j until you pass out. You're like, okay, great. And so that's just something you need to realize and not get bent out of shape about. And if there's any question about what you should be prioritizing on, you always ask leadership because, one, they're the ones who are approving your program, and so they should also have a good idea of what you should be focusing on. Right. So this kind of goes into the previous slide of the threat hunting life cycle. What are you trying to answer? Like, what is the actual point of the hunt that you are doing? Like, I am trying to find do we have malicious activity around scheduled tasks, right? YN, right? It's like your scientific method. What is your focus or your scope, right? If you're looking at the registry, you're not really caring too much about Macs right now, right? If you're worrying about LD preload, well, then you're not worrying about Windows too much. So that is very important when you're trying to realize what your log sources are. So what do I need to be querying, again, to make my querying as effective as possible? What do I need to be looking at here? And you hopefully know these top 3 things before you actually start your hunting. But obviously, the third one is a bit of a nebulous because you might not know exactly what your data points are. It might be something that you've never encountered before. So you're like, well, I need to go out and do some more generic searching to find out what these log sources are and what they would be. Okay, and then in the middle bit, that is kind of where the white bit in the middle is where the hunting is actually happening. So you're writing your queries, you're taking the results, you're analyzing them, you're doing stack counting, or you're doing like a time chart, and you're trying to find the pieces of thread that you're trying to pull, right? So that's kind of where the magic happens, I suppose, is just doing your analysis. And then once you take your results, you're doing the investigation to try and figure out, is this normal? Is this benign? Is this malicious, right? And then obviously if you have something malicious, then you're escalating immediately. But you're just taking that, collating that, adding to your environment notes of this new log source that you found, or like this one machine that does this one really weird thing, but it's approved. We have a exception request for it, so you might as well put it in the notes. So then for the next time a threat hunter comes around and finds it, they know that, okay, that's that machine. It's meant to be doing that. So what are your results? Results can be your escalations, your detections, or your process improvements. So, what did you find? Did you find any proof of badness in your network? And we kind of, the scope is normally between like 30 to 90 days, but it depends on your log sources. Sometimes you have a year, sometimes you don't have a year, sometimes you have, 20 days or 14 days. So it just depends on how much logging you're doing on your SIM. And then there's any gaps identified, and gaps can be, people, processes, and technology. So where can you improve the thing? Like, we're missing a log source, or we don't have these kind of processing capabilities right now for this specific event that's occurring. So your final product is going to be a report, and I think every hunt has a final report, and that can be a very small report, what I like to call micro hunts, where it's just like I'm focusing on this one query that Intel sent to me. I don't have to do this full-blown hunting thing. But you have your executive summary, which has your overview of why should management care about this? Like, has this been actively leveraged against your network successfully or unsuccessfully in the past? Have we seen it before? Is there a threat actor that's now starting to use it that is currently very interested in our company? Why should management actually take a look at this report? Then your findings. So this is any escalations to incident response, they go here, and any high impact gaps. Like, I couldn't actually finish this hunt because I don't have blah, right? That is a huge gap. It's basically, I couldn't finish this, or I couldn't give you anything with high fidelity because I'm missing this. And then, so that's usually the stuff that your management looks at and then processes along up the chain. And then your technical report is the good stuff. So this is where you put your background information. So, I think everybody now knows what the registry is and run keys, right? I feel like you don't really need to have a lot of background information in that. But for maybe other harder to understand concepts again, from maybe a management perspective, like, start talking about sliver beacons and Cobalt Strike and, those kind of things and profiles, or DLL proxying, things that maybe are a little bit harder to grasp. I always like to have a little, like, what is XLL files and how are they executed and what does it look like and why are they used? Because this way then management doesn't go, well, I don't know what the hell this is, and they just throw it out. And then any searches that I do. Again, with the point is, again, with that trust but verify, if someone comes and looks at my report, they can run the exact same query with the exact same time frame and get the exact same results that I did, and they can follow along with my process and my investigation to say, yes, Melissa was right, this is benign, or yes, she was wrong. You can audit my work, that's fine too. But I like to keep that transparency because it's very important for learning purposes as well. And then, of course, the analysis of those results. Yeah. Oh, then I have an appendix of all the queries that I've created to detection. So, hunt scenarios. So, like, how do you come up with ideas for threat hunting? So, can we find use of a TTP that may be downloading malicious files from the internet, right? So that's your classic LOL bins or your GTFO bins if you want to live in the Linux world. Because why would bad actors take the risk of a custom tool which with increased chances of getting caught when you can just use curl or PowerShell or .NET or run it reflective in memory? Why would you want to do that, right? So why not use what is already in the environment? So that is a great way of starting, and that's already documented out on the internet. And actually knowing what's in your own System 32 is also very important because it obviously varies from operating system to operating system. So it's nice to know what you have in your environment and not just trust what, maybe LOLBins missed something, and then you can actually add to the program, which is always good too. And then can we find use of malicious scheduled tasks? Because even though a lot of things like to run in memory, usually they need to maintain persistence in some way, shape, or form because they want to survive a reboot if a reboot is going to happen. Obviously, if you're on a server, you're probably not going to reboot, but never mind that. So malicious scheduled tasks like running in roaming or in temp or their VBS files or their batch files or their PowerShell or encoded base 64. Right? If you start running around looking for the beginning of an portable executable file that has the base 64 encoding, then it's like the TVR or whatever. You start searching for that around your environment. You're like, well, is that normal? Again, maybe it is normal in your environment, but you don't know unless you find out and then make an environment note about it. So then you have your little wiki and you're building up your repository of interesting things. Can we find threat actors? So I think this is always an interesting one because it's very hard to do this. Can we find threat actors enumerating our network once they have a foothold? Because obviously, like once you hit that, you get inside the nice gooey center, right? The lateral movement, it can be really hard to detect depending on what tools you have. But if you think about it from a red teamer perspective, and I think we actually did it even in the sliver thing yesterday, like the first thing you run when you get a shell on a box is normally like, who am I? Or ipconfig, or if, who am I with / privileges, or net commands, right? So you want to know who I am, what privileges do I have, and where am I on the network, and what is my network even called, and who are my friends in the network, my neighbors, that I can maybe RDP to or impersonate credentials. So you can say, okay, well, of these 10 commands that a malicious actor normally runs, if I see 5 of them running in the span of, 10 seconds, 5 seconds, a minute, whatever, I want to know about it. And then you go and investigate and say, is this normal? Yes, no. Is it tied to a script? That's normally what it is. Then, okay, is there a way I can whitelist that? And then I can move on with my hunting, right? So that's always a really fun and interesting one because you find out a lot of interesting things just in your network. Like, why is this thing calling wget out to Tor? You're like, I don't know. It's very interesting. Well, might as well do some investigation and find out. Real-world Sev0 incidents, so Log4j, SolarWinds, right? Those were great because there was a lot of research already done for you. All you had to do was basically convert it to the query language of whatever your SIM is, and then off you go. I think that was SolarWinds happened when I first started working at NBC, and so they're like, guess what? This is what you're doing. I said, okay. I think I came up with like 15 detection queries from just all the documentation that everyone was like Microsoft was putting out. It was very nice. It was like, well, this is my job for the rest of December and January and February, all sorted. Hey, I heard Microsoft is finally doing something about macros. So what's next on the horizon, right? This is another great way of going, if you have an Intel team, to go talk to them and say, hey, is Fancy Bear doing anything exciting nowadays? Or are they changing their TTPs? Did they ever use macros before? Should we be concerned? And that's a great resource to go and tap into. So like we've noticed, I think I've said it before, XLL files, ISOs, encrypted zip files with like JavaScript inside, extensions, Chrome extensions that are like to go into now. So again, it's saying, okay, well, can we hunt for that in our network? Can we hunt for malicious Chrome extensions? Depending, I don't know. The jury's still out. And then what about like Firefox or Edge? So, do you have to be concerned about that? I don't know. You have to know what's in your network to find out. And the cloud. Do we have cloud logging to identify suspicious logins activity? Is it normal that suddenly this user logged in from, Russia and started disabling two-factor authentication? And they started disabling versioning. You're like, I don't know, is it? And so again, you have to go to the person in the cloud that you know and say, hey, person from the cloud that I know, is this normal? Why N? And hopefully the answer is, well, if it's yes, why? But if it's no, well, initiate incident response, go. But the whole point of this, though, is you need to have a high confidence of what you're doing. Like, it's pointless to create a detection that your SOC analysts are just gonna, like the boy who cried wolf kind of concept, right? It's like, oh, yep, and then they just let one get through. We had a perfect example of that kind of like ticket tiredness. I don't know what the term is, but one of our analysts like let it through, and they said, oh, because it's a valid file because the metadata said it was a legitimate NBCUniversal tool. Shouldn't be saying this story, but. And I looked at it, I'm like, that just doesn't seem right because our tool was saying it had a very unique prevalence in our network. And I said, if it's a tool that we've created, surely it should be everywhere in our environment. What is so special about this one random, laptop? Turns out it was a red team. So that was great. That was it was just one of those things where we were just very, very lucky in catching it. So don't mind me just waiting for my sim query to finish. Just again, that's why scoping is really important. So don't just go around searching all of your indices. Try and be as specifically vague as possible is what I like to say. Other great hunts to start with are ones with easy-ish answers. So I think process hierarchy is always a really good one to start with. The Hunt Evil PDF by Sands is, I don't make any money off of Sands, I wish I did, but that's great for system processes. So if every time you boot up a Windows 11 box, it's going to run these 15 processes, and this is going to be the parent of this, and if you start seeing discrepancies, why is that? Again, maybe it's normal for your environment, but you don't know unless you find out. Is your web processes, your W3WP, is that suddenly spawning, command.exe or VBScript or, calling cert util? You're like, wait a minute, this isn't normal. Is this normal? Why N? Again, you have to go and do the research to find out. It's like a fun little game of cat and mouse. Scripting processes with a parent of Word and Excel. This is probably going to go away with macros going away. But you never know. Your company can still say, well, we need macros. We need them. So we have to allow them to be downloaded from the internet. Okay. But again, when I worked for a financial institution, they used macros in Excel all the time. So just saying, oh, you can't block this because it's bad. Well, are you sure it's bad? Like, we use it all the time. So I can't say the fact that I see a macro running, from Excel is bad. If it's going out to the internet, now I might be a little bit more interested. Right? So you need to know what your network is what is normal in your network. And then ones where the heavy lifting is done for you, so your external intelligence. These are just a sampling of ones that you can go and take a look at, and they usually have the work done for you already in the MITRE attack, which everyone loves now and has accepted as their savior. So it's great because then all you have to do, again, is just convert it to your querying sim language, and then you're good to go. But then, just be careful with Twitter sock because it's like the Wild West out there. So it's a lot of weird people. Other great hunts, just lots of great ideas. So ones where you have gaps. So I mentioned the attack framework, right? So one of the nice things that we liked to talk about when I was a consultant was if you have your MITRE attack framework, you have all the thousands of techniques, right? And you start them with all of them red. Say, we have no detections for anything. And then you start to populate it based on whatever your antivirus and your EDR and all that stuff. So it starts to hopefully change from red to greenish, right? There's never 100%. And then you say, okay, well, where do we have gaps in our MITRE attack framework? Okay, well, let's start hunting in there because we know that there's a visibility gap. And even better is if you can actually talk to your Intel team and say, of these 40 red gaps that we have, which ones are the threat actors that we care about? Which ones are they using? And then you're like, so this way you're being as effective as possible in your threat hunting. It has the greatest return on investment. And then, talking to your IR folks. If they hit you once, they can hit you again. Is anyone talking about different things? It's like everyone seems to focus on Windows, but do you have Macs in your environment? Do you have Linux in your environment? Who are running them? What kind of programs are they running? We obviously at my company we have lots of video editing, so obviously they're a very Mac-heavy environment. What kind of malware is currently targeting a lot of Mac users for whatever reason? Do we have detections for that? How good is your EDR tool with other operating systems if you have them? Because everyone seems to be so focused on Windows, they kind of usually forget about Linux and Mac. And then ones from management. Managers have a good view of your company in terms of direction. And they kind of see what's on the horizon. They know about the new applications being onboarded. They know about all these extra things going on. That because in some, security does tend to operate in a silo. They think, this security is important. I don't understand why you guys have to do this rollout of this application next week. We have so many problems with it. But it's like, well, we're going to lose a couple billion pounds if we don't. So you kind of got to, so management understands that, and they try and liaise to make that less painful as possible. But at the end of the day, Start small and have reasonable goals agreed with management. So don't start your threat hunting program with I'm going to find a bear, a Russian actor by the end of the year. You're like, well, that's a lofty goal. It's admirable, but why don't you just start with something smaller, like just try and have a couple of detections that you've actually actioned into alerts. Write a certain number of reports. Like I think a threat hunt normally for us is about 2 weeks from like start to finish. Obviously, but like 30 to 90 days of querying historically just to cover our bases. But it depends on your organization and how big it is. And if it isn't working, change the process. The joy of when you create your own, if you're curating this program, is that you can change it, right? It's small. It's not like this big manageable thing. You're like, oh God, now we got to go through this change management process. Like it's just starting out. Just if it's not working, just change it. It's quite simple. And again, don't settle for we've always done it this way. I've worked in many companies where, especially some of them where they've just been doing this one thing for hundreds of years, and they're like, well, we never had to worry about this before. You're like, well, the world has kind of moved on now, so we can't always be doing things like this, right? You have to adapt or die, that kind of thing. I shouldn't say start humble. It's always be humble, because there are so many smart people in this room and everywhere, and you can learn so much from so many people if you just kind of take the chance to just open your brain. And just learn from everybody, because it's a big wide world out there. And it's okay to stand on the shoulders of giants, but make sure you give credit where credit is due, because there's nothing worse than someone taking your work and not giving you any credit for it. You're like, well, then you're less apt to be so helpful in the future. Realize that not every hunt will end with a kill, but rest easier knowing that your trap has been set. So, you have a threat actor that has landed on your network via whatever method, but you've created all these detections, so they have absolutely nowhere to go now. So you'll find them. But the nice thing is, if they do land on a network, now you're like, now we can try and catch them even further, right? So it's always a game. So that is it. So this is me. If anybody has any questions, comments, concerns. Oh, yes. There's no such thing.
But how would you define the role/profile of a threat hunter as compared to the other roles in the InfoSec field?
So I consider a threat hunter, God, these lights are super bright. I consider a threat hunter as someone who is searching for actors actively in your environment, like right now. So you're already assumed compromise already. What are they doing in your network? So it's like malware. Threat actors. You could also just say malware running in your environment. Like we're not always assuming, there's China or Russia or whatever nation state you want to insert here is in your network. But there's always bad in your network, right? So a threat hunter is meant to be helping to find that badness. Okay.
And another one from me. How do you apply threat hunting, or how would you apply threat hunting principles to integrated third-party suppliers, like, for example, cloud providers in your platform?
I mean, all right. It's like, at least I'm not the first talk. It's very hard, because obviously, like, you mean like you're onboarding them? Like,
so let's say you're using a payment processor.
Yeah.
Let's say you're using a payment processor.
Yeah. So that's usually where we have to get heavily involved with our security architecture and engineering team, because they kind of do, like, they look at the company's network and they kind of do some poking around, and then if we're allowed access, we can kind of look around their network, but normally we don't normally get that. They're like, well, no, you have to sign on the dotted line before and have our networks merged before you can take a look and see what's in our network. And you're like, okay. But it's one of those things where you have to ask them, like, what do you have? Do you have a forensic? Do you have an IR program? Do you have a threat hunting program? Can you walk us through, one of your examples that you've had, or can we talk to them? Can you show us, like, what you've done? Because, where are you in the maturity level? And it's kind of, unfortunately, it is kind of trusting, but trust but verify, right? So you're kind of like asking them to show their work. I don't know if that answers your question. Okay. Okay.
Just a follow-up from the last question. Thank you. Would it be appropriate, because you spoke of SIEM,
Yes.
And the thing everyone's talking about now is SOAR. So in that scenario where we've got our corporate thing,
Yeah.
we've got our corporate login SIEM stroke SOAR,
Yes.
would it be appropriate to share with your third parties perhaps an input into the SOAR, even if it's just a manual or hopefully a feed? Is that something you would consider a good thing?
I mean, you mean like ingesting their logs into your SIM? Yes. No, it's fine. I can hear you.
I'm specifically thinking of if they had an incident
Yeah.
and we were aware of it,
Yes.
perhaps making them manually put a ticket into the SOAR, and if
Oh,
they haven't
right.
got a feed for whatever reason yet,
Right.
there might be an appropriate time where
So-
they're on the threat hunt.
So we have had instances in the past in multiple jobs, not just this one that I'm currently in, where you've had a third-party compromise and you said, look, we need your logs. We need to see there's action happening here, and we have like what we like to call hot wash meetings, during the incident, so they can, tell us what's going on, and then we're like, okay, can you actually give us those logs because we want to verify what you've done, and then okay, now how are you proactively fixing this in your environment? How are you going to fix this so it's not going to happen again in the future? And then of course we're taking that and we're making sure that our environment is also clear. But yeah, like sometimes we get the logs and sometimes we don't. That's one of the problems. Like you have to get all these like NDAs and stuff depending on the third party that you're talking with.
Does the SOAR give you an initial fig?
Yeah, I would say so. Okay.
Hello.
I can't see.
I'm
Oh,
here.
hello. Oh, you're right there. Okay.
So it seems to me that everybody wants to be a red teamer.
I don't.
And that seems to be the thing. But I think threat hunting is a really, really interesting angle of cybersecurity.
Yeah.
How many people are coming to you and saying, look, this is the direction of travel I want to go in. This is kind of straddling that blue team angle, but have an understanding of exactly the types of techniques and things that you use in red teaming?
Yeah, no, quite a few, because it's a perfect blend. It's like a lovely red wine. It's a great blend of red teaming and blue teaming. And I actually should have put a thing on here is just researching, like having your own lab. So like the thing with the sliver yesterday, the whole time, all I could think about was, I wish I was home with my lab and I had all my stuff set up, and then I could actually be just trying to monitor, because like you were talking, doing token impersonation and stuff like that. And depending on your EDR, you can detect that, like integrity levels changing from users suddenly from regular, like from medium to high, and suddenly they're using impersonation tokens instead of primary tokens. Like, is that normal? It might not be, right? But you don't know unless you check. But that's all I wanted to do when I was listening to all these talks yesterday. I was like, oh God, I just want to test this out. I want to test this out in my life. So always trying to be curious, I guess, is a great thing to have as well. But there's a lot of people that are really interested in threat hunting, but they just don't know where to start. So yeah, just try
It
and help
seems
them
to
out.
have become the sort of the area that you have to focus on, because even as a red teamer, you need to understand a lot of the blue team side, and
because you know what to
exactly,
attack. Yeah.
So it seems to be like the perfect mix. Basically, we're saying everybody should have a strong understanding of what it is to threat hunt.
Yeah, and especially like you said, with the frameworks being so amazing nowadays and free, some of them, it's really hard as a blue teamer to do your job. So you can't, let's give the blue team a break. And if we have threat hunters that are also snooping around in our environment, they get a little safer on the inside, but better sleep for your CISO, which is always nice.
Awesome, thank you.
Just another follow-up and a similar question to the one I asked Guy.
I want to put my sunglasses on.
What are you going, I mean, without specifics, do you feel there's some extra measures you want to be looking at, perhaps registry keys on certificates and promotions you just said? So do you feel there's a need for an extra layer around your Active Directory?
I'm not sure I understand the question. I'm sorry.
So you just mentioned the fact that users might go from one level to a higher level.
Yep.
And presumably that's all backed up with some sort of certificate that gets implemented by an Active Directory, silver or gold ticket.
Yeah.
So do you feel there's an extra layer that we might call today threat hunting that might become a new type of protection around the Active Directory itself?
Yeah, I think Active Directory is always an interesting thing, and it's always considered, I would think, a crown jewel of most companies, right? So you should always have additional layers of protection around that. And most companies that I did consulting with, that was definitely something we would say. You always want to have a little bit more stringent alerting and protocols around Active Directory. And you also don't want anyone to be RDPing into your domain controllers, right? That is a big no-no. Like, you should have jump servers and all these extra layers of security. I don't know if that answers your question. Okay. Oh, okay. I feel like I'm going to get a sunburn here. This is crazy. Okay.
So what will you expect to see from architectural engineering that will help you with hunting?
So again, I guess what is a rose? We use it for like onboarding new technologies. So they're the ones who take a look at the security posture, and they also make recommendations in terms of the log sources that we're going to need to be ingested for us from a security perspective. So we engage with them a lot because they say, hey, this is this new thing that we're coming out with, this new platform or whatever, microtransactional thing. These are the things that we're talking about. Do you think this is enough to be doing threat hunting and doing your job effectively? Which is always really hard because I don't know the answer sometimes because I'm just like, I've never heard of this before, so I have to do research. But that's usually how we engage with them, and they kind of let us know of new things that might be of interest to us from a security, like, hey, this could be very important. If someone was to compromise this, we would be in big trouble. Does that answer your question? Okay. Oh, please. Are we done? Oh.
Last question.
Okay.
Yep.
Have you ever been involved in a threat hunt where you've accidentally alerted the threat actors?
Have I ever been, where I've, triggered malware that's phoned home? Oh, not in my professional capacity, no. But when I research stuff, there have been times where I've accidentally done something where I haven't been in my VMs correctly, or I forgot to turn off networking. But that's why you have a VM, right? You're trying to just oh, shoot, and you go backwards. But yeah, so I think that, yes, I have, but not in a professional capacity, of course.
And with that, thank you everybody for your questions. And let's thank Melissa again for a wonderful presentation.